Right, hello everybody. Yes, you might have noticed I'm back at the Superbike factory, but for something quite interesting today, I thought I'd do a video about what I think might be bikes of the future in terms of collectibles and bikes which I think will, now that they're sadly demised from their production lists, will become sought after. So I thought I'd pick 3 bikes out and we'd have a closer look. So come on, see if you can guess what I've picked out this huge lineup, and we'll have a little chat about those. Come on, let's go and have a look. Right, so here's our first contender, the Indian FTR. Who knew this was coming up? And this was an interesting bike, and I put this in the same category as you remember the Harley XR 1200? You must remember, I got one. It was a bike that, you know, was sort of ahead of its time a little bit, and I think the American Indian buying public just didn't gel with it. And it was a bike that, even though, and it's in common with all the bikes that you're going to see today, you know, they really threw the kitchen sink at this. There's a lot of design features in here, the rear tank, the geometry of it. This bike was built to do a job, and it wasn't a job I don't think the Americans really wanted. And it's styling, it's a bit Marmite, isn't it? It's one of those bikes I think a lot of people, when you speak to people about the FTR, they either love it or hate it. It's a real Marmite bike, isn't it? Which is not quite so with the other 2 that I'm going to show you today. But this really is a bike that I think will become an appreciating classic, a bit like the XR. And people will realise there was so many great parts on this bike, and so much went into its design. Because I think you find that when companies, something like Indian, which is so used to making, you know, cruisers, you know, in the Harley world, you know, when they come out with something so vastly different, even though, you know, flat trackers, and this is styled as a flat tracker, and I believe it was used in a race series exactly like the XR. You know, it's so different that people weren't ready for it. But you've got this fantastic twin in here. You know, 1200 cc's, you're looking at 120 horsepower. You know, 120 horsepower of a twin is just phenomenal, isn't it? The sound is epic. But it's a bike you look at and go, what is it? Or you look at it like me and think, that's nice, that's me. I love that they do that, the sort of red-black colours in this bike. But it's a bike which you really got to sort of look at to appreciate in detail. There's lovely sort of carbon sort of inspired pieces on here, that fantastic exhaust. The suspension on here was specially built for this bike. It's really set up to do a job. There's no compromise in a bike like this. And I like the way they've left the red shock there and the spring and all the rest of it. Absolutely superb. The thing is, when you look at this bike, you realise it's actually quite tall. When you actually sit on it, it's pretty upright, but it's got that. The minute you sit on it and you raise up into the upright position, you can see that it was designed to do a job. You can imagine yourself whizzing around a flat track on this sideways continually. It wasn't designed to do anything else. Again, and this is in common with the 3 bikes I'm looking at today. Things like the brakes. You've got all Brembo furniture on here, and you know, I first saw this on a Norton. These lovely caliper brackets, and it's absolutely superb. Single clock. You know, it's all you need, isn't it? On a bike like this. Key positions down here, which is quite unusual. Fully adjustable suspension for damping and preload and all the rest of it. But what a beautiful bike! And again, you've got the. You know, it's so reminiscent of my XR because they were both designed to do the same thing. You know, they were both sort of race style bikes for the road. And you got that lovely swept back position, and I think that's the sort of thing that probably put buyers off in the States, probably because of that. You know, you've got this amazing position, nice seat, nice wide seat. It's firm, but it's nice and wide. Just fab, just fab. There's not a lot not to like about it. You've either got to completely not like it or like it. But the thing with bikes like this, you're looking at the last new price of these was about 17,000. Now this bike, even in a dealership, you're looking at sub 9,000 now, cash buy, which I think is extraordinary value. You know, it'll have no miles in it. It's probably just barely over 1,000 miles. So, you know, goodness me, someone's running. This is why I look at the bikes like this, and you find bikes like this, don't you, nowadays? Someone's done the running for you. Hopefully they've done it well, but they've done the running, and you don't have to worry about it. You just get on it and you just tank around on it. Absolutely superb. But I think the FTR is a very underrated bike, and I think it's a bike that it will have that at some point. It'll have that huge spike in price because it's such a lovely bike. But you really got to want one, and you. This is sort of like the outsider of the bunch of three. But yeah, I think the FTR is a very undervalued bike. Maybe a bike that Indian thought that would do well in Europe, and obviously not so well in France, in America, but it didn't really quite work out that way. But yeah, this is if you're going to promise yourself one bike, this is the sort of bike I would get now before the prices start to spike eventually. They may drop again a little bit, but I think they will spike. Yeah, Indian FTR, that's my first pick. Right, into the British bikes now. What about this for a bit of British bling? This is stunning. So the Thruxton, and to be more precise, the Thruxton R. And this is a 2016 model. But obviously as the years progressed and we got to last year, it went out of production. But there's some bikes out there which are just absolutely, this is one of probably the nicest Thruxtons I've ever seen. And the thing with a lot of these manufacturers, particularly Triumph, do this. You know, when they're going to come to an end of production run, they throw the kitchen sink at the bike, and you get all the latest updates and all the rest of it, the best brakes, the best paint jobs. You know, you'll get special paint jobs on bikes. You know, I'm going to show you around this bike. This is absolutely superb. This one in particular has done about 4,500 miles, and I'm going to give you the price at the end of this. I think you might be shocked. But this is like, it's kind of just come out of the factory. It's got this beautiful seat, the lovely cowling. One thing you do notice when I pick this up, now the FTR, although the weight of the FTR wet was around a sort of 230 kilo mark, not that dissimilar to this, but blimey, this feels heavier. It feels like it's a real solid piece of kit. It feels heavier than, well, maybe it doesn't feel heavier than my Bonnevilles, you know, but you know, the instant noticeability of it was surprising. But the actual bike itself, the thing with the Thruxton was, it was a bike that it's not a bike you're going to commute on. People are going to shout at me now, so you could. But it's not that sort of bike, is it? And it's the same with a lot. I think the FTR you could, but it's one of those bikes that it's an occasion bike, isn't it? You go out for your Sunday ride. But the minute you sit on this bike and you look down the tank, you are immediately in a different world. You remember I said before about, you know, bikes make you feel something when you sit on them, and it transports you to, it makes you feel like you're somebody else, you know, that you're a part in a film or something you've seen. And this does that. You know, you look at the headstock and it's absolutely stunning, but you're very much in a lean forward position. You know, it's quite, and I think that's why the bike wasn't quite as successful as people thought it would be. But maybe it wasn't going to be as an easy everyday ride as the Bonneville. You know, this is a bike you sort of always promised yourself, but I'd only go out every now and again on it. Again, slightly swept back in the peg position. You know, you don't feel any Bonneville in this bike, and I think that's really important, that you're not just out on a tricked out something else. You really are on a proper bike, and that it feels narrow. I know you've got clip-ons on here, but it feels narrow, and it has that racing stance that you are sort of low down. And I have seen some of these with the upright bars, where people have changed those, which is, you know, each to their own. But I think it spoils the original intent of this bike. This has obviously had a few custom trick bits on it, but what I love about these are these tank straps. These are fantastic. I always wanted one of these on one of my Bonnevilles, because the nice thing with the Bonneville, you've got the side cap on there. The reason for the side cap is that when you're filling it up on a petrol station on a side stand, it means this is upright. That's how it works. But there's some lovely bits on here, as you can see as we're looking around it. You know, you've got the upside down forks, you've got the massive Brembos on here, absolutely huge. You know, this thing's going to stop. But God, you can just imagine going out on those sort of weekend rides, can't you? You know, pick the furthest coffee shop you can think of. Just enjoy the moment. So in today's market, what would this bike cost you? Well, again, this dealer is sub 7,000. Cash price is 6,800. That's a lot of bike for your money. And I think that's the state of the market of bikes like this. They're not as popular. You know, a Bonneville in this condition is going to be slightly more than this and more sought after. And that's why I think these now discontinued bikes are really, they're just in that sweet spot for buying. Do you know, if I had more room in the garage and I was looking for another bike just for a bit of fun, this would be it for that money. Jesus, that's absolutely extraordinary. And someone has really cosseted this bike and really looked after it. Superb. So the Thruxton R, and all versions of the Thruxton really, but find one that's got all the bits on it. You know, that's seen all the extras for the end of the production, and I think you'll be quite pleased. You might have backache, but you'll be very pleased. Right, let's go to my last bike in the selection. You'll like this one. Right, last pick. Did you guess? Yes, Norton. Quite unusual to see a Norton here, but I think that's sort of indicative of where these bikes are now placed. You know, they're not seen as such a risk anymore. But the reason I put the Norton in here, because I think it's one of those bikes that its sort of notoriety will be its attraction later in the day, because it had that sort of checkered berth, didn't it? But what I like about the Norton is that it was built as a classic. It's a classic bike that was built to be a classic. Yes, there were compromises when it first came out. You know, people used to complain about dodgy indicators and the odd little bracket, which was pretty poor. But the bikes to look out for are the later TVS ones, and that's not to say that the earlier bikes were bad, because I think all problems on bikes can be sorted. But I think TVS put a lot of money into the 961s the last sort of 3 years, and I think these are absolutely superb. I rode it last year, and I really liked it, and it felt like a real occasion. The SP, the Sport, so you're slightly upright, but it's very similar to the Thruxton in its feel, but it's very similar in its Thruxton in style anyway. But what I liked about it when they built these is that they built that engine, that lovely pushrod engine, and it was built to a real classic design. They weren't really trying to modernise it that much. They were using modern materials and, you know, some of the best components with the suspension and the brake parts and all the rest of it. Again, this has got that Brembo furniture, which I really like. You know, that stuff isn't cheap. The lovely tank with the cut-ins on the tank. It's just lovely. And I can remember riding this bike and thinking, I was doing I did 2 videos a day. I borrowed the bike off Norton, and I did a thing about T.E. Lawrence. I don't know if we saw that. And because I had the bike for the whole morning, I thought, right, I'm going to nick the bike for a little bit longer, and I just went for a ride, ran the Sussex Downs and all the rest of it on this bike, and talking about T.E. Lawrence, and it was just fabulous, you know. But it's a bike that you had to open up. It's that thing that as soon as you open the throttle, the bike comes alive. And I will say one thing about these bikes that I noticed on the bike that I used. If you chug around on it, it's like a flipping dumper truck. That was the only way I could describe it. It really felt like a dumper truck. And as soon as you opened it up, it's just like you woke a beast. You thought, yeah, come on. But in that real classic tradition of a British twin. And that's exactly what it is. This is a classic British twin. British built, Donington, at the factory in Donington. Like, people forget that. You know, people got to say, oh, it's built in India, or it's built. No, it's not. It's built in Britain. It's built in Donington. It's UK design and UK built. Yes, there are parts from here like Brembo, Italian brakes, but who the hell wouldn't want Brembos on their bike? You know, and it's a suspension and all the rest of it. So they used the best components. They just had a funny way of adding the last few bits. You know, indicators from eBay, that sort of stuff. And I've seen that before on other bikes, you know, but I just think the Norton, because of its notoriety about its birth and the sort of shenanigans that went on, was everything a pension fund? I can't remember. Terrible for the people that were there. But you know how lucky that that at the time, you know, Indian money was wanting to India was wanting to put its money somewhere, and they went into bikes in a big way, didn't they? There was a lot of those big sort of entrepreneurs that bought up things like BSA and those names, and they put money in them, and thank God for that. Thank God for that. And so, you know, whatever you feel about that, I just think that's a good thing. And it keeps them alive. And Norton have got an interesting future, haven't they? And that helps these bikes as well. Again, but this bike, no miles on it really. You know, it's got about 1,500 miles on it. And it's just a pint and a pasty over 10 grand. You know, so you got to think TVS bike, 23 plate, you know, it's the one to have, isn't it? But superb, what a superb piece of kit. And again, we've got that again slightly back feel to it. That these are all the Thruxton and this are sort of like the calf racery sort of bikes, aren't they? The FTR is more that sort of an American attempt at a naked sports bike, obviously in the street, in the flat tracker genre, but it has that sort of attraction to it. But they're all built to make you feel something. All three bikes are designed to make you feel something when you get on them, something different that you don't get on a commuter bike, you know. And that's the joy of these bikes. They're occasion bikes, real occasion bikes. It's the one that, you know, unfortunately, you know, when you eventually do roll off this mortal coil, you know, someone's going to open a garage and say, oh my God, he had a Norton. The guy had a Thruxton. And it'd be sitting there, wouldn't it? And all they have to press the lights on, and it'd be and the lights will come on, and they see this sort of black gold JPS sort of colour like bike sitting there, and you think, oh, that guy was cool. He knew what he was talking about. So there you are. That's my thoughts on these three bikes. You know, they've gone out of production, but I think they still have a place, and I think their time will come. With all these things, you know, their time will come. There you are. So thanks quickly to Superbike Factory for letting me waste their time this morning. It's been really kind. We were going to go out for a ride today, but the weather's just so bad. I'll put a link up to the three bikes that we looked at in the description. I dare say by the time this comes out, they'll probably be gone anyway, but I'll do that. So there we are. Right, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Take care and ride safe, whatever you ride. Take care.